You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 62. Today I'll be talking to Alessandra Maria. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist Alessandra Maria. Originally from Seattle, but now based out of New York, Alessandra makes gorgeous and timeless works using mostly charcoal and gold leaf. Those materials and the beautifully stained paper that she uses gives her work a very old aesthetic while also being extremely modern. I talk with her about her charcoal and gold leaf technique on the show, as well as the way that she develops her compositions in terms of patterns instead of light, her upcoming solo show at Gallery Fledermaus, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Alessandra Maria. Alessandra, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on.
Hi, it's so good to be part of it. I'm so honored. Thank you.
All right, so let's dive into your background a little bit. And I know that you were born and grew up in the Seattle area. So was that? I mean, were you on like the outskirts of Seattle, like suburbs, or was it more in like the heart of the city?
Yeah, so it was suburbs. I am originally from a small town called Redmond, Washington. It's not so small anymore because Microsoft was founded there in the time actually, in my period of time growing up. So I got to see it go from like a very sleepy little unknown town to an explosion of, a much bigger town. And yeah, born and raised and went to high school in downtown Seattle. So, I have a lot of roots in the city proper. And yeah.
What kind of work did your parents do? Was it anything like art related?
No, not even remotely. My mom and dad, so they both, as I was growing up, they were in food manufacturing. So my mom ended up owning my mom went to Italy when she was in her early 20s and she fell in love with calzones. And so she started herself in like this little basement, this little calzone company. Like she would be like hand rolling them with her rolling pin and doing all that. And they eventually built it, bit by bit into like a major manufacturing company. And they did really well for a while until the recession hit, and there was a whole series of things that happened that was unfortunate. But now they work in the pizza industry.
And you were just saying that they won an award. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's the cutest thing ever. They won a pizza award. So they both came into New York to receive their award for their pizzeria. But it's a pretty big deal. It's an Italian award. I guess there's only like 50 pizzerias in the world who get this award, or the country. I'm not sure. And they were going to be there with a lot of their icons, the people who are really, really in the pizza world they really love. So that's going to be really fun and very cool.
And that was all like sparked just from the time that your mom spent in Italy?
Yeah, I guess we're a family of kind of crazy, passionate people. And, I love art. My mom's religion is pizza. And so, so that was where I got started. And yeah, that's what they've built their life around.
Well, I know that you've spoken in the past about either your father or both of your parents really instilling within you that work ethic, just being as an example of just a strong work ethic looking at your parents.
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely. Like they were always, they like, yeah, that was a huge family value, is working extremely hard. I mean, I know that's a very common family value, but I know for me, I would remember watching my dad and just like, you know, how hard they worked to build it.
How did I guess how did art enter your life then? If parents, it didn't come from your family, what got you interested in art? Like, how did you become interested?
So basically, my I was always really, really interested in art. My When I was growing up, my mom had a coffee table book on Botticelli, and I remember, leafing through it and looking at just all the different images in there, and just kind of being astounded, thinking, how the heck does a human being make something like this? It was just beyond comprehension. And so that kind of, and having like, I don't know, yeah, my mom liked Renaissance work. So there was a lot of that in our household, just like these reproductions and books and things like that. And in addition, I really, really loved fantasy books, and I loved making up my own little world. And so when I was a kid, I really started drawing a lot because I was trying to basically make these worlds, make these expansive environments and these, things that I would be making up in my head. And, yeah, I started doing it at that age and I just never really stopped. And it's basically what I do to this day in a lot of ways. It's not that different.
Most of like what sparked your creativity was more internally driven, rather, because a lot of people will be comics or music
Yeah.
covers or things like that will spark their creativity, but it sounded like it was more just you wanted to get these stories out of your head.
Yeah, yeah, that absolutely is what it was. I think it was very innocent. It was very, very, very simple. Just, yeah, I'm just one of those people who have a very rich internal world, always making things up. And so it's always been kind of an outlet for kind of solidifying these things I would just come up with. And it was always like, a fairyland, when I was really young, that was stuff like that, or Zelda fan art or God knows, whatever. But yeah, that was definitely the starting point for it.
Is it something that your parents like actively encouraged in you? Like, were they supportive of your interest in the arts?
I mean, yes. They not, I think they played it. It was interesting because they were definitely supportive and like, oh wow, very nice drawing, and like all of that. But like, I think as I got older and I kept drawing, I think it got a little frightening for them
Mm.
because they're like, what, okay, like, when are you gonna, what are you doing? And and when I said I wanted to go to art school, that one was a very big hurdle to get over. They were, you know, they they were worried, and with good reason, honestly. Now, from what I've seen with the art world, it can be really difficult. So, from what I've seen now at this point, being 32 and having done this for, I want to say, yeah, about 8 years full time, it makes a lot more sense now, having seen how freaking hard it's been, and how much of a journey it's been. So, yeah, they were, yeah, it was an uphill battle at certain points, but once I started getting into galleries and doing all of that, obviously they were super supportive, and now they're my biggest cheerleaders. Now they're always like, don't lose faith, just keep doing it, just keep going, you can do this. It's kind of their perspective now.
As far as like opportunities to learn, like at a young age, I know that you went to an all girls Catholic school, and I've
Yeah.
never been to a private school, or I've always been to just public schools. So like, I don't know what the difference in like opportunities are with Catholic schools. Like, did you feel like you had the same opportunities to pursue art as you might have had in a public school?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, are you talking also from like the political perspective, how like certain things, certain subject matters wouldn't have been as appreciated in a Catholic
I
school?
think I think partly that, but then also just, do they even have a flourishing art program? Like, is it even
Ah,
something that you could entertain
yeah.
as option? You know.
No, honestly, that's a really good question. Because so I was really, really lucky. I loved my high school experience. I went to a school called Holy Names in Seattle, and they're super STEM focused, so it's an all girls school, but they were really focused on pushing girls into feeling like they can be, scientists or mathematicians or working in medicine or whatever, like these areas that maybe girls aren't as actively encouraged. So this school is super, super focused in that arena. But I was really lucky as well because we had the most incredible art teacher. Her name was Amy Anderson, and she made such an incredible environment for finding, what you love in art and expressing yourself that, the school was as on average, supportive as most other schools, but she in particular was what made it, from good to spectacular.
Nice.
So
yeah. That's awesome. And so you ended up going to Pratt, as far as
Yes.
like the universities go. And I believe you're the third person that's gone to Pratt that I've talked to. I think Travis Louis was the first and then Caitlin Hackett.
Really?
So like, I guess what motivated your decision to go to Pratt?
Well, I think so. There were a couple different things that came together. One is I got a scholarship. So that was a huge motive because obviously art school is really expensive. So that was a huge component. And two, Pratt it was more of a traditional bend and a little bit more, like more of a traditional, like atelier kind of an environment. And I really have always been drawn to more traditional media. It felt right. There wasn't any other way to say it. It just felt when we visited, we looked around. I didn't get into RISD. So that was the other, it was like Pratt or RISD and I didn't get in. So that made it kind of easy
Sure.
too, So yeah, but I loved Pratt. It was perfect. It was perfect for me in particular. So
I guess, going to New York, I mean, you were already kind of in a big city environment, but New York is like a whole other thing. So like, was that a big change for
God.
you and like that adjustment?
Oh my God, it was, yeah. Yeah, it was a massive change. I was, because we would go running around downtown Seattle when I was 17 and 16. I would skip class, and go down to like Broadway. And Seattle was a lot different then than what it is now, from what I understand and what I've heard. I haven't been back in a long time, but in New York, there's nowhere that even can scratch the surface of New York, save maybe like Tokyo or whatever, Shanghai, in terms of size. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a huge stretch experience. It was it was eye-opening in so many ways, and it definitely felt like a small town kid, kind of being exposed for the first time to a an actual huge city. And I made those classic mistakes like the subway ones, and I had my things. I got mugged at knife point at one point.
Oh,
Like I
no.
had yeah, 13 years later, I've got fairly battle scarred at this point.
Is that like one of those experiences like everybody has at some point being robbed at knife point? Like it's one of those things where if you live in New York long enough, at some point it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. It's funny. I think happily, I will say I don't know anyone else who did. And for me, it was the craziest circumstances. I was walking home when it was sunset on a totally safe street, totally fine. And, but just wrong place, wrong time, the circumstances. And, but nobody else I know. I don't even know anybody who's been pickpocketed, honestly. So I don't know. But I can't speak for all New Yorkers, obviously. It's just my friends. So, yeah.
And so your focus at Pratt was communications design, which I think was the same as Travis. And I remember talking with them about it, like what an ambiguous name that is. Like I'm not exactly sure what to even make of that term. I think what he explained was sort of an umbrella of a bunch of different focuses. So for you, was it more like illustration? Is that what your focus was within that?
No, that's a good question. So ComD, we called it communications design. So yeah, it was an umbrella program for advertising, graphic design, and illustration degrees. So originally when I went to Pratt, my parents' stipulation was we will we'll be on board with this so long as again, the scholarship made a difference, but in addition, like you're not going to art school unless you're studying graphic design. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm studying graphic design. So I went to Pratt, and was in ComD, and underneath the umbrella program of ComD, graphic design is one of those majors. And about midway through my sophomore year, I realized that I freaking hated graphic design. I could not. It was just like, because moving like one little pixel at a time. I love typography, and I also have a lot of respect for, graphic designers who do it and can do it so well, because it's such a psychological art form. You know what I mean? But it just wasn't for me. And so I knew that I wanted to be a fine artist, but I would have had to take an extra year of school, which was just way too financially not going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. It was way too expensive. So I was able to transfer from graphic design to illustration, which is still under the umbrella of ComD. So I didn't have to take an extra year. And that was actually why I ended up in illustration as opposed to fine art.
Did you get any friction from your parents? Because they had set that line that you have to be in graphic design.
I didn't tell them until I'd done it. So
okay.
I didn't tell them until it was, I think until I had like my second day of the semester or something like that, of, having started it. So, yeah.
So I guess moving into illustration, like, what did you imagine what was your career goal at that point? Graduating with a degree in illustration, what were you hoping to do with that?
That's a good question. I think at that point in life, I was kind of looking at everything. I was trying to figure out, exactly that. What do I want to do, and why do I want to do it? And I have this I kind of have this. I don't know where I must have read this in some book somewhere. I read a lot of self-help books. It's just something I do, apparently. And I remember running across this really interesting idea, which is, in essence, like, it's pretty common, but if you're the absolute best at one thing, it could be the most random, a niche thing, but if you're the guy for this one niche thing, you will be successful. You can find success. And so when I was in the middle of this, thinking about this switch and thinking about how I wanted to do fine art instead, I kind of was thinking, like, if I were to make the apex of what I wanted to see, like let's just ignore from a work perspective. Let's ignore the amount of labor that's required. Let's ignore anything regarding possibility, what I think I can do. Just be as wild in terms of my dreaming of, like, what's the best kind of work that I want to see in this world, so to speak. And I love Leonardo da Vinci. I love the Burlington House cartoon. I saw that. And I love Klimt. And, and I was also always really influenced by those early Renaissance works, with the halos and things like that. And I thought to myself, like, geez, if I can't imagine what it would look like to be in a room full of this kind of work, this kind of weird vision I had. And you know what? I'm just going to try to make it. And in terms of a plan, in terms of figuring out my life direction, in terms of figuring out, like, no, I just need to make the best work I possibly can, and other things will figure themselves out. I don't know if does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And so I guess, were you already thinking in terms of being a gallery artist? Because you can go in several directions with an illustrations degree, right? You could go into commercial illustration. You can go into,
totally.
comic books. You can do a lot of things with illustration. So you were already thinking about I want to be a gallery artist?
Gallery artist. I think, I think I was at that point. Truly, it's kind of galling to think about how little I planned when I was making these, like, life pivots. But really, the main thing I was focused on wasn't even the how, it was the what. Like, what do I want to make? And so I wasn't even thinking in terms of, like, would I want it to be a book cover? It was just, what's the work look like? Like, what's the apex of the work? And as I started really fighting to make this kind of vision I had and really pushing, and it's taken a lot of work to get to the point where I feel like I'm getting there finally, 15 years later, for God's sake. But, like, I think it kind of marinated into, the people who do this show their work in galleries. So it was almost like this reductive process of, like, going backwards and being like, this is what a gallery artist does. Like, that's oh, I want to be an artist. That's what I'm doing, I guess.
It seems very like pure to me because I mean, rather than being influenced by is this a marketable thing that I'm creating or is this going to satisfy X Y needs, you're thinking about what do I want to make and I'll figure out what to do with it after I've made it.
Well, I was a completely naive 21-year-old girl. I just didn't, life's realities had not punched me in the face yet. I hadn't really, and like also, I think this was the other thing was like I went through a period of a lot of financial strain, but up until that point, I had been a very spoiled, like very, very privileged, very fortunate girl who had never had to be hungry. I'd been very, very lucky. And so I do think that that contributed to a real sense of naivete as to how, trying to plan it out and figure it out. And yeah, and then when a bunch of financial things did happen, then it was like, oh God, I really have to make this work, you know.
Yeah.
So which all worked out, I think, in the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so you ultimately graduated in 2012 with your BFA in illustration. And I guess how did you feel about just your overall time in school? I mean, was that a rewarding experience to you? Like, did it help you grow in the ways that you needed?
Yes, that was, I mean, Pratt was perfect. In particular, the illustration department at the time was really focused on just helping you build and figure out aesthetically who you are. And I just had the best teachers. Kenichi Hoshin was a huge, huge help and influence throughout the years. He's still been incredible and still is a mentor of sorts. And Rudy Gutierrez was really, really incredible too. Veronica Lawlor, Chang Park. Just so Pratt was such a perfect nurturing environment for figuring it out.
And so once you graduated, did you have no desire to go back to Seattle? Like it seems like you stuck around New York. Would that just become home to you at that point?
Yeah, well, it was complicated because I think so. My parents went through a bankruptcy because they were in the middle of moving their business from Seattle to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and so yeah, and it was going to be a really good move, but the problem it kind of happened like a stack of cards, like they were in the middle of the move in early 2008 when everything was great, the economy
Mm.
was swinging, and then as they were in the middle of this huge move, and again, you're moving manufacturing equipment, all of this stuff, it's a big deal. 2008, the crisis hit, and one by one, their investors went bankrupt, and it kind of fell like a house of cards. So they weren't really able, uh, basically my extended family came together and helped to make sure that they were okay, but they had to move to Louisville, Kentucky, which I had never been to before. And Seattle, so basically I didn't have anybody there. So for years I wasn't really able to go back because it's so expensive, and I get a hotel and a rental car and all that. I couldn't really afford it. And so Seattle, I have like a little bit of a hole in my heart where Seattle is because like I haven't been back in so long, and I really want to pretty soon. But I kind of hit a point where I'm like, okay, so New York is home now, and I had to make it here, my whole base, everything, my community. Yeah.
And what is the art community like? I mean, what has your experience with the art community been like since you've been there?
It's interesting. I mean, all like everyone's awesome. There's a lot of artists here who have, been fortunate enough to, have friendships with and like, interact with. And obviously there's tons of inspiration everywhere in the city because it's an endless number of shows and an endless number of things like that. Yeah, the art community is awesome. There's just so much inspiration to draw on, so to speak.
And so like once you got out of school, what kind of like work did you do right away? Did you dive right into your personal practice, or did you spend any time like doing commercial work just to pay the bills?
No, I was worried that if I did, I was really worried that if I ended up doing commercial work, that I wouldn't do the personal work, because that like creative engine. And I don't recommend that necessarily as a means. Like I do think I was so hell bent on making this work, and that I got a waitressing job, which I knew, first off, I needed it just to pay the bills, but like, I could have gotten something that was a little bit easier, like a secretary job, or like, something that's a little bit less physical, and waiting tables. I don't know if you've ever worked in the service industry, but it can be pretty brutal. So I was really hell bent on making sure that, I had a strong fire under my ass to push. And so I would wake up every day and work in the morning, and then I would go and wait tables at night, and personal practice immediately. And then I got really lucky because Zach Tudor from Supersonic
Hmm.
Electronic, which is a wonderful art blog, he was having a group show, and he was my first real break, and he sold those pieces all sold, and I think I made something like $2 an hour on each piece that sold, or like I think it was even less, maybe even like $1.30 an hour, something crazy like that. But they sold, and it was like this huge victory, like, oh my God, I can't believe I just
Yeah.
sold two pizzas. So, and then Ken Harmon gave me a chance with Spoke Art, and that was kind of my beginning.
Very cool. So how did Zach come across your work and you make that connection?
So I was obsessively and relentlessly sending my pictures of my work to every blog on the internet. In the meantime, I was like, "Hi, this is what I do. Please look." I think at one point I had made a list of like the top 70 art blogs on the internet, and of course everyone ignored me, like except for a handful. And Zach Tudor, though, was like, wow, I really love what you're doing. Like, I'm going to post it. And the posts did well. And then he said, hey, we're having this group show. So
Hmm.
that was kind of how it got started. So, yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. And I think your first solo show was at in Seattle, Rock LaRue. Is that your first solo
Yes.
show, or how did you have a show before that?
I had a couple shows. So, yeah, I was with Spoke Art. So, primarily group shows, and then Rock LaRue with Kristen Anderson, who was lovely, in Seattle. And that was really great. A wonderful experience. The work sold, and yeah, I just kind of kept going. It was definitely like showing, especially in those early days, like show to show to show. It was definitely paycheck to paycheck, still waiting tables, trying to make this work, and seeing like how is everybody else doing this, because it was a fair amount of money, but it wasn't enough to live on, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And yeah, so that was really, really great. That was the start, and then I just kept going and kept building.
And so I guess how did you get to? I mean, what was the point where you felt like, okay, I have enough financial stability where I can give up the waitressing work?
So that was a point. So the first 4 years were grueling because those were the years where, because like, don't get me wrong, like these galleries like Spoke Art and Rock LaRue, like they show some incredibly successful artists who are making it full time. I was the pipsqueak, brand new to the game, that they were giving a chance to. So like I was still figuring this out and building. And one of the ways that it works for most people is you just have to get your price point past a certain threshold. And so that for me came with Steve at Arcadia Gallery, which at the time was located in Soho. They've since moved to California and now I think they moved back to Soho. But he gave me my first real opportunities where he tripled the price of the work, I
Hmm.
think, overnight,
Wow.
and and was able to sell. And yeah, he really was able to move the work. And so that was the first point where I was like, okay, at this point, a price point, I can make this work. If I'm walking with at least 1,000 per piece, then I can live. Based on, but it's hard to say that though, because like uh sorry if I'm all over the place. I feel like sometimes I communicate in 5 million directions at once. Um, the thing is, like, it was a very complicated metric because you have to bear in mind, I have to calculate how long on average does a piece take to make, and then how much am I making an hour, really is the calculations. And at each point I had to check in, like, all right, what am I making hourly, and am I able to subsist, and
Yeah.
and what percentage of the work sells.
So is that how you measure your price points? Is by the amount? Because I know there's a lot of different methods, right? It's the size of the
Totally.
work, the the mediums? There's a lot of different ways you can come up with
Yeah.
that number. Is yours based more around the time that you put into it?
That's a good question. So for me, no. I like I said, I think it's because I started perfectly happy to be making $1.45 an hour on the work. Like just jazzed beyond belief. Don't get me, I would not feel that way now, but like that's kind of like that was the starting point in the perspective, and just, kind of seeing it like, okay, I just need to. So the goal for me is always just the market really determines the price. Is the work selling at this price point at like 80%? Is 80% of the work selling at this price point? And if the answer is yes, then we keep edging up the price point. But I don't know how much you've spoken to other artists on this podcast about this issue. My understanding of it from everybody who's an expert in this, in the art world, is you really can't ever lower your prices. So you have to be incredibly careful about raising them. And, so I always err on the side of going cheaper for my work than, like I always end up like, trying to think of it like, what do I really think this is going to sell for sure? And then, what feels like a little bit more of a stretch. And then I will work with my gallerist right now, who's Jerry Suki, who is amazing. I've been working with him for 6 years. He knows my work in and out. He's, been an incredible champion. And we work together to find like, all right, what do we think this is actually worth as defined by collectors in the market, really?
Yeah, because you're right. Like that there is a lot of stigma around going backwards, and the impact that I mean, the responsibility of art people that have already bought your work, is now their work worth less. Like there's a lot of concern about just going backwards in price. So that is a very kind of careful thing to go
It's
up.
a balancing act. Yeah, because I want to respect my collectors. These people invested in me. They took their money and they put it on, they bet on me. Like I want to honor that. And so I'm very, like, I always will err on that side of caution, where I would rather the work be where it is for too long, too cheap for too long, than to make a jump too rapidly. So to respect them as well.
For sure. So at some point, once you got your feet under you moved to Hawaii, which seems like an enormous change of pace. You moved to Maui after living in New York for almost probably 10 years at that point. Like, what prompted that move to Hawaii?
Well, that is a story. So I met a guy, honestly, my now husband, Matt, and he hates New York. He can't stand it. He doesn't like it. He's a nature guy, which I can't blame him. I also love nature, but he just, it really is a stretch for him. And so we were dating. We had started dating, and we'd been together for maybe, I want to say, a year and a half. We had just moved in together maybe 3 months beforehand. And he looked at me and he said, "I hate it here. I want to go somewhere else." And I said, "Okay, And he said, I don't want to go anywhere else. Like I've always imagined that, this is my home. You don't understand. Like I lost my home. I don't have a home in Seattle anymore. New York is my home. Like I don't want to go anywhere." She's like, "Okay, if you could move anywhere in the world, where would you move?" I was like, "All right, Japan, Paris, London, Hawaii." And then it's like, "Stop, shut up." And 2 weeks later, this motherfucker got a job on Maui. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're moving to Maui.
You did say Hawaii, so.
I did say Hawaii. I couldn't argue with him. And he is a project manager to the core. So he coordinated the majority of the move, which is one of them, like a massive life perk, is being married to an excellent project manager. Just as a side note, highly recommend it. And Hawaii was like, oh my God, it was a dream.
Yeah, I mean, just that. So you going to New York was a huge adjustment. Going to Hawaii, now another huge adjustment in the other direction.
Yeah.
I guess how did that work out for you, and how did you like living in Hawaii? I mean, with that slower pace that comes with it.
Oh man, it was beautiful. I think Hawaii, Maui in particular, is one of the most beautiful places in the world, in my opinion. The beauty there is it feels almost sacred and haunting. People associate Hawaii with only with beaches, which of course it has, and pina coladas and resorts and things like that. But the reality of Hawaiian culture, basically the Hawaiian people is and their culture is so beautiful and thoughtful and so in tune with nature and so in tune with, the Aina is like I guess the Hawaiian word for it. That there's this whole side of Hawaii that's so much more rugged and rustic and dangerous, honestly. It's actually a lot more dangerous than people realize on these hikes and
Really?
in these vertical mountains. Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's a lot of tourists who think it's like Disneyland and they do not respect the mountains and it can be very dangerous, but so it was deeply inspiring. It feels like a very sacred place in a lot of ways.
How long did you end up staying there before you moved back?
We were there for 2 years, and we had to move back honestly because of family and also Matt. So if you can't tell by now, I can live anywhere. I can do my work from anywhere just as long as I have my studio set up and everything's good to go. So Matt really though with his work, he's been more location dependent. Not as much anymore for other reasons, but he got a job offer that was too good to refuse, and so then we had to move to Boston. So, no offense to Boston. I'm sure Boston's a lovely city. It was just a little bit of a going from like a wonderful hot tub into like diving into a like freezing plunge pool or whatever those are called from Hawaii. Is oh my God, literally the opposite.
The way you said we had to move to Boston was slightly offensive to Bostonites.
I know. I'm so sorry. It's a beautiful city. It's got so much going for it. It really is. It was just God, in contrast to, it was just a really hard contrast to Maui,
Yeah.
I guess is all. So, but it was fun. I think it was good to be closer to family in the end as well, which was really nice.
So how did you end up making your way back to New York? Like, did that just pull you back at some point?
Yeah, you know what it was is I know we hop around a lot. So, right before COVID, again, I'm saying this like Boston was a beautiful city. It was, and it was so welcoming. We managed to, we got a little crew of people we hung out with there, and I just felt so welcomed in Boston, and and it has so much to offer. That being said, my community in Boston wasn't as developed as my community in New York is, and I'm a very introverted person. It takes me years to really become close friends with someone, and so I really, really missed having my friends, and I missed the insanity of New York. And so I kind of looked at Matt and I was like, okay, we've gone on your little boondoggle of going to Maui and going to Boston. Can you please just give me a couple more years in New York? And then, before we have kids or anything, and so I can have a little bit more time here and then we'll leave again and we'll figure it out. And to his credit, he was like, okay, I get it. Totally. So he came back for me, which I appreciated.
No, that's awesome. And was there a period of like readjusting to the pace of New York once you got back, or were you ready to go?
Not at all. I love it. It's such a crazy city. I don't even mind the smell of urine anymore, honestly, in the city. I know it's just, I don't care. It's like a crazy, it's like New York is like, I don't know. It's just, it's nuts. I think it feels almost like a meat grinder. It's so, and the things that I have seen that you just, from living here for, X amount of years, is just sometimes mind boggling that any New Yorker sees, between guys riding unicycles to work to, other, other things. I just,
You're selling
yeah.
it so well. The smell of
I know, I'm
urine,
sorry, I
meat
know.
grinder.
Yeah, I know. It's like this crazy, I don't know. Yeah, it's like a little bit of Stockholm syndrome, but I love it. So, it's definitely my home.
All right, so let's dive into the work itself. And you mentioned
Sure.
earlier, as far as early inspirations, you mentioned the Renaissance period of
Yeah.
art that inspired a lot of what you got excited about early on. And you can definitely see that, I guess, in the work that you create. So what is it about that period of art and that like style of art that's made such a strong source of inspiration for you?
Well, it's actually I think there's a confluence of factors at play there for me. It's one. Uh, I think there's always something kind of interesting about art that feels a little strange or a little off. And in the Renaissance, they were still, as you know, they were still figuring out the rules of realism and representation. So, for example, Botticelli to me is always fascinating because the way that he works with the picture plane, it's almost, those the Flemish tapestries, how like the figures are like on like there's no realistic plane
Right.
of
Right.
perspective. It's just like the figure in the foreground is just lower, and then there's somebody in the mid. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Right.
And Botticelli kind of does that in a lot of his work, and I think I've always thought there was something kind of interesting about that kind of off, like it's. I think it has something to do with it speaks to a time before science. It speaks to a time when magic was still really a mode of understanding the world, and magic wasn't something that was seen as this, like, Harry Potter, like, ooh, like fairy tale thing. It was really something more sinister and scary, and like lightning was magic.
Right.
And I think, yeah, and I think something about that time period when science, which is incredible, but humanity didn't have answers, and so art, these pictorial representations of the Renaissance, are kind of it, their way of figuring out this very strange world we find ourselves in. And I think in addition to that, Renaissance artwork to me, in particular Da Vinci, I know he is the most famous artist in the world, but I do think I don't this I he's still my favorite. God damn it, I don't care. He's so good. And there is something about his work that I haven't really experienced with any other artist, but when you confront it in person, you actually feel like you're confronting something that is sacred and that is just as cognizant of you as you are of it. And I think that kind of like that sacred object, like this object that you feel like you're looking at it, and it's imbued with this something. You know what I mean? And I think Renaissance art really captures that.
Hmm. And I think something that's really strong in all of those is, and something I think is a central focus for you as well, is iconography, and just making that kind of sacred object, like you said. I guess is your specific use of iconography or icons, and intended to tell a story in some way? Like, are you trying to communicate a message through the icons and symbols that you represent?
Totally. It's to be honest with you, I feel like I'm still figuring that out with it in terms of I always like there to be some form of narrative, like some sense of like this is one of the reasons I'm always playing. One of the biggest tools I'm always using in my work is hair, in the sense that when you it's so easy to give a sense of motion with hair, like a sense of either floating or a hard wind or a stillness or so like I so I always want the work to have a sense of motion. And I always like for the figures to feel like they have a sense of interaction between them. I think what I am kind of solidifying for this show, which is slated for fall, I think the opening date's going to be on my birthday, November 5th,
Oh, nice.
which would be really cool, honestly. I'm a Scorpio, if you couldn't tell. So what I've been figuring out with this show is I really have always been also interested in witches and societies of like these kinds of societies of like the like pagan religions and the religions pre-Christianity, pre-science, pre all of this, like the religions where again people were trying to figure things out. So in terms of narrative, to answer your question, I am finding that I'm creating this kind of world where there's this interaction between these witches doing these I'm thinking of them as spells, but I think I'm going to come up with a different word for it. And I want it to feel like the viewer almost in like a Blair Witch Project kind of way, even though I'm going to be honest with you, I've never seen that movie because I cannot handle horror, but I this is what I imagine it's like, so I'm probably going to sound like an idiot on this, but this is what I'm imagining. Like this really terrifying thing where, you're on a hike and it's way past dark and you are lost and you're pretty scared because you think like, I don't know how I'm going to get home, and you're kind of freaking out. It's getting darker and darker, and now the stars are starting to come out, and it's, and then you just catch out of the corner of your eye this group of women, but they are clearly not human. They're clearly divine, but not necessarily benevolent. You don't know if they're benevolent or evil or not. You don't know. There's kind of this terror to it, but they're beautiful, and it's like the whole thing is like, so it's almost hypnotizing what you're seeing, but it's also like, wait a minute, maybe I really shouldn't be here because I'm stumbling on something dangerous. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, that's interesting because I think in an early interview that I read, you talked about darkness in a very different way than what you just described here, where you described it as trying to achieve like a comforting darkness, where something where you feel safe and comforted, which I thought was interesting because that's not an obvious kind of connection to darkness and comfort. But now you're describing something very different, which is like, I don't know what the hell these people are doing. I'm afraid because of the unknown. So are you going in a different direction intentionally in that way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I have been. I've been looking at it because I think the thing is, I mean, it's obvious from my work that I love beauty. I love to make things beautiful. I love to zoom in on a square inch and go like an ant across the page with a pencil, like I love just overwhelming beauty, and I love drawing the female figure. But I find that, in my opinion, my best work is work that has what I think of it as teeth, where there's just this edge of a little bit like, ooh, that's kind of scary, or that's kind of weird. What is that? And I think, so the relationship to the darkness, part of that, I've like shifted that in a way. And I think though that's like a psychological tool I'm using. I don't know if I don't think it comes across for the viewer. It's just how I'm thinking of it to make it, if that makes sense.
And so I guess you said you're not you don't like horror movies or afraid of horror movies. So going in a more scary direction is an interesting choice. Is that like your way of confronting your own fears in a way?
Yeah. Dude, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I think. Yeah, because I think maybe. It's funny because I think like I almost want to like, I don't know if I know that the viewers can't see it, but I almost want to like show you like.
Nice.
This is not going to make a difference, but whatever. I'll give you some images if you want. But no, I don't know. I think I don't know. I think that's a really good question. I know the reason that I can't handle horror movies is actually is really mundane. It's just I'm very sensitive. That's Matt likes to say sensitive flower, which I think is meant in a derogatory way, but he's joking. But I think, I've just always had a really hard time with that stuff. So I don't know. I think, because the thing is, to be realistic, like the work itself doesn't feel 100% that horror instilling. It's still, in my opinion, beautiful and captivating, and you want to look at it, in my opinion. Maybe not everybody's going to feel that way. But that's what I'm trying to have in the back of my mind as a narrative, to make sure that it doesn't veer too much into, ooh, you know what I mean? Like,
sure,
just over the top. Yeah.
So when you're working on a full body of work like this, do you try to tie the pieces together in a way that I guess has that sort of narrative throughout all of them?
Yes. So right now with this show in particular, I'm really trying to go in that direction where it is. It's almost like I'm thinking of it. I'm making up a society of witches in a way. There's no other. I mean, I want to be also respectful to the Wiccan community and see if I can come up with a better word, because, but something where it's a community of these demigoddesses, is maybe closer, honestly, demigoddesses, that are this point. If there's a triangle between animal, earth, and human, they're smack dab in the middle of that triangle. So this whole show has this narrative. I'm building that world. I'm like writing out these little short stories on the side to like help me kind of conceive it, which I'm never going to show anyone because I'm terrible. I can't even, but it helps me, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess how do you arrive at your ideas for pieces or for like large bodies of work like this? Do you do intentional like brainstorming activities, or do you just write like you said a minute ago?
Yeah, so it's all over the process is all over the place, especially in the beginning, and then it becomes extremely regimented. So to start, it could be as simple as me walking down the street and having a vision in my mind, like seeing a visual. It could be going to a museum and seeing a piece and saying, I love the way that they oriented that figure. I'm going to take that exact orientation, but I'm going to switch it in this way and put this in there. I take a lot from other artists and I take from photography a lot. I will draw other photographers' work all the time in my work, and I try to change it so that you can't tell. So I find inspiration from all sorts of areas. And then as the process goes on, though, then I'm taking a ton of reference photos. I'll take photos of models, and then I'll take some photos from the internet, and I'll start to bring it together and try to make an actual collage and Photoshop, layer after layer of tons of photos, trying to like put this together. And that is, in a lot of ways, the most intellectually difficult part of the piece, because what's really important to me is that the piece feels 100% what I call airtight, meaning every single leaf, every single hair, everything works compositionally with each other, that it couldn't be a single other way. So I have to really, I move everything around. I'll take tons of references. I'll have this one reference that I love, and then I'm just realizing it's just not going to work, and I'll have to get rid of it and figure something else out. And by the way, as well, those references are extremely high resolution, because when I'm drawing from a photo reference, for me, there are some brilliant artists out there who can draw from their head. I am not one of them, unless there are leaves or hair. And I can make up some, but it's just the piece is only ever going to be as good as your reference, and in my from my work at least. So these are huge files, and the collage honestly can take me like a couple weeks from start to finish to really make sure that it's perfect. And then from there, it's almost like I have to be a human printer for the piece itself, you know? Like someone said to me at one point, like, why don't you just have the collage be the piece? And it's like, because the process of drawing it and gilding it is what unifies it and makes it
Yeah.
a totally unified world, in my opinion.
And so back to the sourcing like reference photos, and you said you take a lot of your own photos and use models for that. When you set up like a photo shoot, do you already have a really solid idea of how you want to pose them and what kind of figures you want them to create for you, or is it more of an organic thing where you just get people in a room and start taking photos?
Totally. It depends on the piece. So there can be pieces where, again, I will have seen, for example, a reference on the internet. And I would have been like, this is so beautiful. I want to work with this, but I'm going to change, like if it's a face, for example. And, so I take that face and I'll put it in Photoshop, and maybe I will replace the eyes, and I always change the hair. I try to change it, a significant amount so it's mine, if that makes sense. And also so I'm respectful to the original artist, like the original photographer or whatever. So when I'm doing stuff like that, then it's extremely direct what I'm doing in terms of positioning the models. And I know exactly where I want the hand. I know exactly where I want the arms. I know exactly the type of model I need. Whereas if I'm starting from scratch, like let's say I was on sidewalk and I had this image for like a standing woman with this vertical kind of dot spell thing, like that because that's a concept that I'm working through right now. Then in that case, I will have the models in, and I'll just do a million different iterations and try to see how does this look, and then bring it together. But I think, who was it who wrote that one? Was it? There's this one quote I'm forgetting where the writer was like, writing a book is at the beginning is the most difficult because the first sentence determines the last sentence or something. Like,
Mm.
I don't know, the point is that as the collage continues, there's so many fewer choices. It has to be, I don't know. Anyway, I digress.
Well, and as you're building that composition, I found it super fascinating discovering that you tend to organize your compositions around patterns instead of like light.
Yeah.
So I wanted to explore that a little bit because I saw a process shot that you had posted. I think it was on Instagram where you had a collage that was marked up with all these zones, different colored zones, and you had like connections between them, showing relationships. Like it seemed fascinating to me just how you were working through that. Can you describe that process a little bit about using patterns to kind of organize your compositions?
Totally, totally. So it borders on the insane, I think, honestly, but this is just how I like to think about it. Because I really so what's the best way of describing this? So basically I think about the work, like I will think about the work in terms of like fuzzy vision, for example, where you're seeing like general areas, and then sharp vision, right? But there's a couple, so for example, there's a couple different ways that I will work with pattern in a piece. So for starters, contrast dark and light. There's a reason I love only working with, charcoal on paper and then throwing in the gold leaf, is because really these patterns are composed in terms of black and white and maybe in, areas of gray. So first I'll start with that. Like, okay, how am I moving the eye around in terms of the lights and the darks? There has to be a proper distribution, and everything is conceived in terms of triangles. So when you're looking at my work, one of my goals is that I have your eye jump to each spot. So once that general framework with dark and light in terms of triangles is worked out, then I take that, it's a very, very rough sketch. It's like these really broad areas of like dark, light, dark, light. And then what I'll do, and like thinking like, okay, this is a figure, for example, like this giant block of light is a figure. And then the hair is often a block of dark. And then, for example, like an area of light would be leaves that are made a lot more light and bright than ones that are receded into the background, right? Is this making sense?
Mm-hmm.
It is okay. I could talk about this for a long time because I think it's so fun. So that's the starting point. And then I try to introduce an additional layer of complexity where then I think in terms of tight and open in terms of pattern. So certain leaves, like really detailed leaves with lots of ridges, that's an example of tight pattern work. So I'll have an area of that that's very like bright and you can see it, and I'll distribute those in terms of triangles. And then I'll also distribute in terms of triangles. Skin is an open area typically. So this is one of the other reasons I love working with the female form, is it's really easy to work with all these open areas versus like the tight pattern work. So yeah, so there's that. And then lastly, to like really cap it all off, then on top of that, those two layers of triangles and pattern work, then I'll layer on the dots or the butterflies or the golds. And then I have to distribute pattern wise. Like if it's the butterflies, for example, that's an area of really tight pattern work as well. But when you're adding the gold into it, that adds a whole other dimension. So you have to distribute that equally and correctly, or the dots. Anyway. Once again, I digress.
How did you arrive at that approach? Is that something that you learned, or is just something that you just organically developed because that's just how your brain works?
You know what? It's funny because I think when I was in college and, going back to when, like all those financial things were happening and I was like, holy crap, I need to make this work. I kind of went through a very obsessive period where I would go to the Pratt Library and I would take out 10 books at a time. And I would just sit there and I would spend hours leafing through each one and really, really obsessively drilling into the compositions of the work that I loved the most and trying to analyze it and understand, like fuzzing my vision, then going sharp and seeing how are they doing this? How are they moving your eye around? And that was a really common method that was consistent in all the work I like. Now, this method though works in particular for me because again I work with drawing, and this is the one benefit. Drawing has a lot of drawbacks compared to I'm sorry. It has a lot of drawbacks in comparison to painting. Painting, you can make the most luminescent, gorgeous worlds, but you compose it in terms of light, as we mentioned. But this is the one area where working with inks and with drawing really shines is you get that tightness that you're able to do this kind of pattern work. So I was looking at those Renaissance artists, seeing them doing it, and lo and behold, they weren't painting with oil. Most of them were painting with egg tempera, or the Flemish tapestries. They're working with thread. So yeah, that's how I stumbled across it and kind of made up my own rules, so to speak.
And how did you, I mean, you mentioned the difference in mediums and how you, by necessity, approach it differently. How did you land on charcoal as like your medium of choice rather than paints or like acrylics or oils?
Well, I'm a garbage painter. I am the worst. I there's something about it. I just it is a yeah. It's an embarrassment. I can't figure it out. I don't like it, and it doesn't like me. I appreciate it, and I have incredible admiration for artists who can handle that medium well, because to me, it's like I don't know what the best way would be to put it. Like it's just so it's so difficult to get the kind of detail. It's not the way my brain works, and it's also not the way that I like to render. So on one hand, drawing has always been my strength. That's what got me into art. That's always how I've worked. Charcoal never was my favorite, if I'm going to be honest with you. I actually kind of hate charcoal, but I had to work with it because graphite does not get dark enough. It has too much flash. It has too much shine for what I'm trying to do. So really, this was the necessity of the vision over enjoyment, without a doubt. And over time, I've now come to love charcoal, but that has been a rocky relationship, so to speak. So, yeah.
And so how did, I guess, gold leaf enter into the picture? So you could, it makes sense how you got to charcoal. How did you introduce gold into what you were doing?
Yeah, so I fell in love with it when I saw Klimt for the first time in person. I saw what he was doing, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, holy crap, like, I can't believe you're allowed to do that and be called an artist. Like, this is so gorgeous. And at that time I had been trying to figure out and really understand contemporary art, and the socially important stuff, because I felt like I should. I felt like I needed to understand, the Mikhail Borimans of the world, and the Ed Ruscha, and like all of those guys, the really the important ones, and quote unquote. And Klimt kind of smacked me in the face, where it's like, you know, I just want to make beautiful things, and I don't think that means I'm probably never going to be one of those. I'm not aiming for those artists at all. I'm just aiming to make things that make me happy, and I feel really lucky that other people are interested in it. But that's how Gold Leaf came in. It was kind of this abandonment of like trying to be accepted by the art establishment, so to speak, and just make the apex of what I wanted to see. And Gold Leaf was part of that.
Awesome. I guess at one stage in your process, do you usually figure out what elements are going to be gold, like where gold in your pieces are? Is it part of that early kind of digital composition work that you do?
Yeah, yes, it's crucial, because that's one of the most important, because obviously that is the most important mechanism for moving the eye around, because it's just so bright and it's so intense. And I work with gold in a lot of different ways, where I dull it in some things and I keep it really bright in other ways. In terms of deciding what objects to make gold, that's a much more intensive process. Like fabric took me a while to figure out, because I had to figure out how to do it, and that's a part of my process that I do keep a little secret, is how I do how I do that pattern work, because it took me a long time to figure it out, and it's kind of one of these things I worked hard for. So, and if anybody else can figure it out, they're more than then go for it. Like go to town. But yeah, so I have to, though, in terms of figuring out what objects to make gold, it's all based on pattern work and seeing if there's areas where I can like the butterflies have like a black and white, like a very graphic architecture to them that makes it so you get a sense of what they look like in a dimension, but I only need black to convey that with the line work. And with my fabrics, I try to do the same thing. Like only like a black architecture is all that's really necessary to give you a sense of this molded effect, so to speak.
Does that include like the dot patterns and sort of the geometric gold aspect, elements that you add as well? Is that an app?
Yeah.
Like something you do at the end once you see the whole piece, or do you plan that from the beginning as well?
I plan that from the beginning because it's such an important part of it, and those are always a nightmare. I call them dot days because they're just so grueling. You have to sit there and go deet deet deet. It's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. But like, I mean, honestly, probably close to like 2,000 on one piece alone. But I think, yeah, so that is always worked out ahead of time. And it's taken me a long time to build up this library of Illustrator and Photoshop files, which are just these dot geometries that I've designed and worked with math and like tried to, put them together and things like that. So.
Do you feel like that your tendency towards that is a callback to the time you spent in school with graphic design? I mean, as much as you said you hated graphic design,
Yeah.
it feels like a very graphic design approach.
Totally. That you are so on the money. That is exactly what it is. And it's like it is and the funny thing is like I hate doing them, but I love the result. And it's similar to like my feeling of appreciation for really competent graphic designers and like their work. So, yeah, definitely.
I think the other aspect of your process that I'm curious about is your how you prepare the paper, because I know you use stained
Sure.
paper, and I think you have walnut ink listed as what it is now, and I think it used to be coffee at some point. So I guess, what does that process involve? Like, do you prepare that yourself? Do you have does somebody provide you with the stained paper? What does that involve usually?
No, I do it myself. So Andrew DeGraff, shout out, another one of my super influential teachers in school. He taught us how to stretch and stain watercolor paper. And I did start out with coffee for a while, but the effect wasn't consistent enough. And one of the reasons I liked coffee is because it's acidic, so it's going to age in a very specific way. And that's really ties into the meaning of my work in a lot of ways. Is like this aged, like, ancient artifact is what I want it to feel like. But what I need the work when it's all in a room to be the exact same color and to be the same consistency. And so I had to switch to walnut ink and, kind of rely on how I do the staining and all of that to kind of give that aged feeling to it. So yeah, I made that switch, and it's an easy process. It's just like doing a giant wash in watercolor. It's messy though, so because these sheets are big. But yeah.
Have you ever had any problems using paper as a medium logistically because of the size and or durability of them,
I've been really lucky. I have made some mistakes on pieces where, for example, like, with painting, a lot of the time you can always paint over something if you make a mistake or you can do something. But with my work, if I spill black ink in the wrong spot, the piece is ruined unless I come up with something. And there have been one or two pieces where I spilled ink in the wrong spot and I had to invent a flower there to go over it. It's like, oh my God. So there's definitely that. But on the bright side with it, transporting the work is really easy because I just get to roll it up. And I guess painting, though, is the same thing. I'm not a painter, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, the work is more delicate. I have to be really careful with it, I would argue, in comparison to other mediums, for sure. But I'm careful, so.
Awesome. Shifting gears a little bit before we go into your new show, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the book that you worked on a few years ago. And I'm probably going to completely butcher the pronunciation of a few things as I talk about this. But I think it's like Pudian or Pudan.
Yeah. Pudan, I think. I'm not very good at French, but yes, I believe it's Pudan, yeah.
And it was published in 2020 in both, I guess, sold in both Spain and France, written by Cécile Roumigier. I believe is how you pronounce that.
Roumier, she's so sweet. I think Roumier, I think. Something. Sorry, Cécile. Yeah, I wish I could pronounce of course, this beautiful last name, and just Americans were butchering it. But yeah, something like that. Yes.
How did you get involved in that project?
So I was very, 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 very lucky. Benjamin Lacombe, who is a brilliant artist in his own right, incredibly kind human being, he reached out to me and he said, we're doing this book, I'm organizing this book, and Cecile has made this manuscript for it, and we would really love for you to illustrate it. And my first answer was, there's no way I can do this. Like, this is so much work. I can't even imagine it. And Benjamin really worked with me to be able to help me, like to help make it possible. And we reduced the number of pages I'd have to do so I could really focus on them. We did some digital wizardry, which made it more possible. And it was honestly, it was a really wonderful project. Really fun, really different from anything I'd done. I was kind of like, I've never, I'm not very good at drawing settings. And so it was a perfect opportunity to really dive into that and give something new a try.
Was it a really like collaborative process? I mean, you said you worked with Benjamin quite a bit. Did you work with Cecile directly as well, or was it more of kind of a solo activity?
It was more, they had some ideas, but they really let me run wild with it, which was super appreciated because I think one of the things I was worried about is that I wouldn't be able to do a good job. And one of the reasons for that is like certain subject matter is difficult for me or certain things. And so they really let me kind of uh, follow my gut and gave me suggestions and then asked specifically for like one or two pages that would have been that were a little bit more challenging, but gave me easier deadline, guidelines with it. And so the process really was more creative on my end, and then they were kind of like my benevolent guides throughout the process, so to speak. So yeah.
And so was the process for you very similar to what you do for your personal work, or did you approach it differently?
I had to approach it differently because the imagery was so different, and because also with my work, I have flexibility to, like, if a piece starts one way and then it ends up veering in a 180 and looking completely different from what I had originally anticipated, which happens a lot, that's okay. But with this, the end result had to adhere to the narrative, of course. So it was very different from anything I'd ever done before in that way, and a welcome challenge in that way. But the process was a lot more, it had to be a lot more iron tight and a lot more point A to point B to point C.
Did you have to do a lot of research just because it did have a pre-existing history with it being a French fairy tale? Did you research that like time period and the story?
Oh yeah, I mean there was a lot of really beautiful visual inspiration. I'm forgetting the name of the author who did the original. It's totally escaping me. It's somebody incredibly famous from like the 17th century or something. But there was already a version of it done that was really, really well known, and so it kind of felt a little daunting to, kind of, yeah, kind of, and but that also means there was plenty of visual fodder to be working from as well.
Awesome. So let's talk about what you have coming up. You mentioned your new show, so I want to talk about that. And so I guess you said it's in November. Tell me about the show. Do you have a title? What gallery is it at? Let's talk about
Sure,
it.
sure. Yeah. So we don't have a title yet. I'm toying with a couple names. Potentially Hex is a name I'm toying with, but I don't know if that'll get nixed. I'm not sure. We'll see. It's with Gallery Fledermaus in Chicago. So this is the gallery I've been working with for about 6 years. Like I said, Jerry is my champion. He is just really been a huge, huge, you know, support of my work over the years. So I'm super excited to be taking part. And it's a daunting process. It's a lot of work to fill an entire room. It's taken me a long time to figure this out. So
Do you know how many pieces they're going to be?
I'm not sure yet because, to be honest with you, actually, just before I was meeting for this podcast, he had swung by the studio space like at 9 a.m. today. He happened to be in New York, and so we were going over, what we can expect and what we're hoping for. So no defined number yet, as many as possible while keeping the quality up. Right now, I have about, gosh, six large, one huge, three medium, two like 18, not two that are maybe I want to say 18 by 16 or something like that. And then I'm gonna have at least another three medium, and then I'm gonna do a bunch of little small ones as well.
Do you try to mix those sizes up? Is that like an intentional thing for you?
Yes, because a lot of the time, for whatever reason, I draw best when I'm working at life size in some capacity, and with a lot of my previous work, I wasn't able to work life scale because of constraints, not being sure, we weren't sure if what would the reception be to work of that size, and my work can be kind of harder to sell sometimes because there's a lot of nudity in it. So I've normally tried to work at different sizes so I can, see like how is this going? How is this going to do? How is my little brainchild coming? I don't know if that makes sense, but the point is I like to work at life size, and working small enables me to zoom in on these points of detail, so to speak, like hands, but the hands are kept the same size. And working medium lets me zoom in on something else, like a back or what have you, or it's certain interaction between figures. And then working large is a big interaction between figures, and more of a setting is established.
Very cool. And what was the date again? You said like November 5th, is that?
I think that's the official date. That's what we agreed upon today, this morning at 9 a.m. is November 5th, which is also my birthday. So I'm very excited about that.
When people come to the opening, they'll have to wish you happy birthday and celebrate.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think it'll be fun. Yeah.
Awesome. So what is the best way for people to keep up with that and find out the latest about the show as it develops?
Definitely. So through Instagram, I post most of my stuff through Instagram, and there's going to be because I have a lot of the work on its way now, there's going to be an exponential torrent of new images of the new work that I've done so far, and then also the stuff that's on the pipeline. And there'll be updates on the show, and it's going to be at Gallery Fledermaus it's in Chicago, and it's probably like I think 6 p.m. I'm not sure what the time will be, but something like that.
Are you going to be attending the opening?
I will be. Yes, I will be in attendance, probably wearing some clothes to match my figures. So, to kind of build out the world. So it'll be fun. It's going to be a really good night.
To do that, did you base those patterns on existing clothes that you have, or are you going to create the clothes?
No, all of it, because I need photo references.
Right,
So I've
that's
spent
true.
the past couple of years really building out like a library of potential jewelry and fabrics. I love collecting fabrics. Some of them I had gotten when I was in Indonesia, others while I was in Mexico. And I have some really, really fun jewelry I've managed to get as well, costume jewelry and things like that as well. So
Awesome. Is there anything else that you'd want to put on people's radars? Print releases, stuff like that you have coming up?
there'll probably be a print release around the time of the show, for sure. Just keep following along. And also on my website, I do have a newsletter. I barely ever send anything unless it's like a show or, there's new pieces or whatever. So definitely consider signing up for my newsletter if that's your jam.
Awesome. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I don't know. Eric Jones. Yeah, maybe Eric Jones. He's great. Super fun, a really good friend. Kind of like my art compatriot. We've been through thick and thin together. So he's a brilliant guy. He's super fun. He's hilarious as well. So.
And is he based out of New York there? Do you know him from your time in New York?
I do know him from my time in New York, but no, he's no longer in New York. I think he's in Florida right now. So yeah, but he's all over the place, and he's a big deal. He's always making. I think he just did this collaboration with Lululemon, which was insane and awesome. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Alessandra, thank you so much for doing the show. This has really been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me. This was a joy. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys sticking through all of my half-brained answers. So,
that was perfect. So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Alessandra. It was so interesting to hear about how she develops her compositions and, especially how much work that she puts into figuring it out. The way that she said she keeps working on it until it's really quote unquote tight, till there's like no other way that it could be other than what it is. I thought that was really interesting. And as a chronic overthinker, that is hard for me to get to that point. It always seems like there's, something else that can be done. So reaching that point where it couldn't be any other way must be an enormous challenge. And then also the way that she put so much thought into how the viewer's eye moves across the piece and organize it around these, progressive layers of patterns, I thought was super fascinating. I'm excited about the new show that she's working on. It's looking like it's opening on November 5th, which is also her birthday. The work for this show focuses on this encounter with a group of witches in the woods and shifts her treatment of darkness from having a comforting, safe feeling to being more tense and a lot less certain. But even though there is that shift in tone, beauty and the strong feminine are still at the core of the work. Be sure to follow Alessandra's and the gallery's Instagram to stay up to date with the latest for the show. And if you're actually able to attend in person, remember to wish her a happy birthday while you're there. So thanks again to Alessandra for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you could help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.